I don't know about you, when I'm looking for a plumber, I like to read my reviews. HomeAdvisor.com gave me some reviews on our sponsor, Art of Plumbing. Called them. They arrived on time. Immediately found the plumbing issue and fixed it right the first time. I called them last year and it was great. I called them again this year because I had a problem again. They came out, they fixed the problem. They even gave me solutions to help stop the problem in the future at 541-9405.
Hey, come take a walk with me, not like you used to do. Do something different and put yourself in other people's shoes. Open up your mind and open up your eyes and change your direction, change your perspective.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes. Of course, I'm your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's not every day we get to go to Canada. Now, for those of you freaking out right now, we're not literally in Canada, although it'd be fun. But with this pandemic, we gotta get virtual. So pack your bags. We're near Toronto area, which, by the way, is my favorite city in Canada. Brings me back to my Toronto Blue Jays days when I was watching Joe Carter hit home runs off the Phillies. So sorry, Mitch Williams, but welcome in my guest. She's a new author. She has a book coming out at the end of this month, and we are so excited to sit with her. Tara, welcome in. How are you?
I am great, Neil. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, Zencastr, we'll just give a shout out. This is our first time doing Zencastr, so hopefully we're doing okay here. I don't know. We're just going to give this a shot here and just see what happens.
I think so far we're doing okay, other than our initial little bleep, but that's okay.
Well, that was me. I mute my microphone during the music, and then I forget to unmute it. So there it is. Full disclosure, now everyone knows my trade secret. So Tara, you're a mom, right? Aren't you?
I am, of two little girls.
And tell me about them. I mean, you don't have to give names or anything like that. Ages, though, would be fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a 5-year-old, almost 6 next month, and an 8-year-old who are really loving this whole homeschool, stay at home all day with mom and dad, new way of living.
And you mentioned your husband. How long have you guys been married?
We have been married, 14 years as of this May.
Wow.
So yeah.
That deserves like a high five right there, because a lot of people aren't staying married anymore. So that's awesome.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, we've been together for a long time. Even before we got married, we dated for about 5 years prior to that, which is, I know, uncommon in a lot of Christian circles, but we were in school still. And so, yeah, it's almost been 20 years that we've been together.
So I met my wife and we were 17 and 16. I was 17. She was 16 in high school.
Aww.
And yeah, I actually skipped a class to ask her out.
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
You beat us because we were 18 and 19 at the time.
Well, yeah, but you were like college kids, right?
Last year, well, actually, no, second year of university was when we met. And then we were at the same school, and then he went off to do his master's about 3 hours away from me, and I stayed closer to home. And so it was after we finished our master's degrees that we finally tied the knot.
Well, at least you got college out of the way. That was our probably biggest mistake. So now I'm going to get email from family members saying that wasn't your biggest mistake. There were others. Anyway, I'm sure people didn't hear it. Come here to talk about my war stories of dating my wife. But Tara, what size shoes do you wear?
I wear an 8.5, and I'm holding to that half.
Hey, no judgment. And then is there a certain brand or style you like to wear?
I am known to wear Birkenstocks. I've been known to wear them ever since high school. So even when they were unpopular in the in-between years, I still wore them. Yeah, and I got a pair of hunter boots that are looking pretty sad right now, but given the weather we're having in Canada, they've made a reappearance for the spring.
And how close are you to that Toronto area? Were we kind of on with our geographical pinning of you, so to speak?
You got it. Yeah, I'm in the suburbs of Toronto in a town called Milton. Nobody knows where Milton is, so I just always say I'm near Toronto. But it's about a half-hour drive when there's no traffic. And we are notorious for having, I think, some of the worst traffic in all of North America. So if I were driving during rush hour, it'd be more like an hour and a half.
Now, again, I did like the Blue Jays during those Joe Carter days. I mean, that's no just trying to get in your good graces here. I mean, this is
Oh
true
no,
story.
Kelly Gruber, and
Yeah.
I think there was
Fred
Alex
McGriff,
Gonzalez.
Tony Fernandez. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I could. Joe Carter, of course, was the most famous. Cito Gaston, I think, was their manager.
The coach,
Yeah.
or manager, yeah.
Holy smokes!
Those were our glory days.
Yeah.
It seemed like a long time ago.
It does seem like a long time ago. I actually bought a new. They had the black kind of hat come out, and I bought that hat, and it reminded me
Oh,
of.
look at you.
Yeah, I know. I don't know where that hat is now. Who knows? But anyway, so let's talk about your book, because I really want to know about this book. Like, I know it wasn't written specifically for like my demographic, but I have a middle schooler. She's 12. In fact, she's just over in the next room, probably saying, "Dad, you're talking way too loud right now." But I'm just curious, like, what went into writing the book, Fade to White? Did I get that right? I hope I did.
You got it, yeah.
And then tell us kind of why you wrote it and why folks should go out and check it out.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for asking. This is a story that came from a place of hurt for myself. I had to discover that anxiety was a huge part of my teen years, as well as an adult, and had never really put two and two together in realizing some of the reactions and irrational thoughts I was having to how I was going about perceiving the world and every relationship I had in it. And it came to a place where I was at home. I had just had my first daughter, and I had a full-blown case of postpartum anxiety, to the point where I couldn't even leave my house without having a massive amount of preparation involved. And my husband was extremely gracious during that time, but he finally got to a point where he realized, this is not healthy. You need to acknowledge that something's wrong here, and we need to get you some help. And through the amazing support of my family physician and counseling group, and both my husband and I have health science backgrounds, so we readjusted the kind of exercise and what I was eating and the sleep I was getting. And then I took a big change in my faith life. And through that, I began to journal. And that journaling took me to a place of really desiring a creative outlet as well. And I really think creativity is a part of healing when you're dealing with mental health also. So all that to say, I came to this place of really wanting to share not only my story, but the stories that I'd sort of gathered over the last few years of working with youth in a variety of youth programs, and within my job as well, because I work within schools. And I now had this little human being who I wanted to be able to write something for. And at first started off with writing children's books that never became published. By children's book, I mean picture books. Met with an amazing author who came to my house for tea. She's a Canadian author named Kathy Stinson, and she wrote Red is Best, which is like a classic Canadian picture book. And she was really encouraging, but candid with me in that, maybe you need to try writing older as your starting point. And maybe you need to share some of those stories that are on your heart from when you were a child or as a teenager. Because I think she was able to recognize with me in that brief conversation that I was hurting still. And from that point, I started reading Fade to White. Didn't have a title. Didn't really have a plot. It was just me writing a few chapters based on a girl who was also struggling with anxiety and who was faced with really big questions about life based on her purpose in the world and death and grief and what to do with those things and where to find hope. And that was the beginning of Thea. That's the main character's story. And then as I learned more about the craft of writing, I began to understand story structure better and could establish a better understanding of the world that needed to surround this character in order for her story to come to life.
What is it like when you take something that wasn't there before and create it and breathe life into it. I mean, because I got to be honest, I have always wanted to be an author in some respects, like seeing my name in print. You know, I was a, up and coming budding journalist, wrote for the school paper, nothing too fancy, was a sports guy. So of course, obviously you could tell that from my Blue Jay just file that was way stuffed back in the back. But my point is that I'm saying is, as for me, I struggled with writing, still struggle with writing. And it's fascinating to me that writers can sit down, and maybe not all in one fell swoop, but sit down and create this life, create this world, this ecosystem that didn't exist before. I mean, how did that even come about?
It's pretty magical, and it's not something that I think for a lot of people happens in any short period of time. There are people who are gifted with that. But it's an evolution. It's a process that comes with spending hours with these characters in your mind and allowing them to grow deeper, creating stories for each of their lives, and then understanding how those lives would unfold if you put them together in a particular place and time. I know for Fade to White, it really was so enjoyable. It was really cathartic for me because I knew the outcome that I wanted to get to. I knew that I needed Thea to have hope in the end. I knew that I needed her to heal a little bit from the place she was currently, because that was where I was headed. And so that story needed to unfold with a climax that allowed her to understand that she wasn't alone within her struggles. But yeah, it is such a wonderful creative outlet. And I know some people don't necessarily think of writing as being like an artistic outlet the same way painting.
They're lying if they're
music.
saying that, by the way. They're lying, because it is. Sorry, I'm going to jump in on that. They are. I'm sorry. Writing to me, much like music writing, any type of writing to me is very artistic because of the elements that come into play, right? I mean, you talked about on Instagram a while back about getting inspiration from being in that Toronto area, walking the paths that you've walked, and things like that. And to me, what's more artistic than that? To bring that life that I'm obviously not going to go anytime soon to that Toronto area, but you could bring it to life through words and through, the metaphors and the, really good writing takes you and puts you in that and immerses you into that, setting, whatever it may be. So.
Oh yeah. And it changes your life too. Like I'm someone who read a lot as, a child and as a teenager and now as an adult. And I cannot name all the books that have changed my life, but there have been so many. And, sometimes it's that the content really hits home for me, but other times it's just the way that the author is able to weave words together in such a memorable and impactful way that I'm shivering and I'm holding on to that emotion far beyond the last page. And then that goes and changes how I see the world around me and how I interact with people. And what a gift that is to be a part of someone, even though you're not there with them, right?
Totally agree. And so that's why I'm curious. So goal of the book is what? Do you have a goal for the book or goals for the book? I don't know, because I've never written a book. Are there such a thing as goals for books? I don't know. This sounds like a silly question to me, but I thought, it seems relevant, but now it seems silly after I hear it. So.
No, for sure. Well, I had that cliche goal of if only one person reads this book and it impacts their life, then I will have not wasted the last, how many years, 4 or 5 years of my life.
Why? Okay, hold on. Why is that a cliche goal? Because that's my goal for the show. Now you make me sound like I'm cliche. Like if one person downloads the show and changes their life, I've completed myself as a podcaster. Wow. Throwing shade on my goal. Fine. Wow.
We're cliche together then. We can be cliche together.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but is there goals for the book?
No, but I think that like really was the heart of why I wanted to write. I said, you know what? I want to share this story because if I don't share it, then nobody knows the struggles that I and the many young women that I've spoken with have gone through. And mental health is something that is rarely spoken about candidly in a group setting. Yeah, you might discuss it at your youth group, or it might come up in a health lesson at school, but it's not something that a family will sit down on a Friday night and say, hey, let's talk about your mental health today. But a book can allow for that conversation to be sparked. And again, writing this was my hope that those conversations would be sparked for teens with each other, but also with their parents, that it would give light to the fact that mental health and particularly anxiety is something that is very prevalent. And that if we don't acknowledge it and allow people to work through those fears, that it can get worse. And it can lead to a really dark place. So that was my hope, that it could offer a starting point for conversations, that it would allow faith to be involved within that mental health conversation as well. I really wanted to acknowledge the fact that as someone who comes from a healthcare background, who did a lot of education around sort of the biopsychosocial model of health, that faith can be a component of that and should be a component of that when it comes to looking at someone's overall well-being. That was a really big part of my healing journey. And so again, this story hopefully will allow people to recognize that as one other addition that they should be taking into consideration when they're looking at their mental health and how they can improve.
Yeah. And as I was hearing more of your story and more of your creative writing process through, different shows that you've been on and just different things that you've been talking about, not only this book, but your story, it kind of got me thinking of another author we had on. And I don't know if you know her. Her name's Tracy Maxfield, because, I don't know, Canada's not as big as the United States. Just kidding. I have no idea on that one. So somebody's going to write me on that one.
We're big, but no, our population is quite small compared to yours.
Correct. That's kind of what I was thinking. But anyway, we had Tracy Maxfield on, and she wrote a book, and she's also from Canada, and she wrote a book called Escaping the Rabbit Hole, Her Journey Through Depression. And to me, when I was hearing some of your story, I'm like, you know what? Tracy's book maybe is geared for kind of adults, maybe, and things of that nature. And I thought, here's a book that could potentially be, a great outlet for young people, because I have a youth background, youth pastor in my resume as well. And so for me, hearing that there's someone out there putting some thoughts together and some, ways of dealing with this together in a very constructive way was powerful to me. And I'm excited that you were willing and bold enough to do this and kind of answered the call, right? And so that leads into my next question is, what do you hope readers take away from this? Because obviously you felt called to do this, but what do you really hope people take away?
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. Well, definitely, because I work in youth ministry as well, and I definitely hope that it encourages teens from within the church, as well as beyond, to be more open to discussing their mental health. I really hope that it is a fun way for them to read about someone who is going through these struggles in their own life. I know that learning about mental health sometimes can be daunting. And so the idea of writing it from a fictional standpoint is a little bit less intimidating. So I'm really hoping that teens can take this and say, I can read this just for fun. And maybe something comes out of it that will apply to my life. And hopefully I can then use towards other people in my life. The ideal situation, Thea's story is one where, again, she's discovering her own faith as well as her own journey towards forgiveness and recognition of her purpose in the world. And those are really big themes. I recognize that. But the hope would be that some teens can see within her story a small piece for themselves in the world, that they can recognize that their own story is worth sharing, and that it can have a huge impact on just even their friends in their own social circle. And by being brave enough to share their words, it doesn't have to be through writing. It could be through any creative outlet. It could just be through conversation, that they can have a profound impact on not only their future, but all their friends, as well as the larger world. And I think sometimes we forget that, relationships are so key to this gospel message that we hold to as Christians, and that we are called to be in relationships with people. And one of the best ways we can do that is by seeing those relationships lived out. And again, this story is just something that allows them to see broken relationships lived out, because there's a lot of brokenness at the beginning of the book, for sure, and recognizing that even within that broken state, that they can still be used, and that they can have amazing impact with things that they might not see as special in themselves, but that God has put in their lives for a reason to be used for really unique purposes. So a small example, without giving anything away, Thea has this compassionate side to her. She doesn't really recognize what it's used for, but she always buys an extra cup of tea. And by buying an extra cup of tea for people, she ends up bringing a lot of joy through that small act of kindness. And it's so tiny, but it has a profound impact over the course of the book. And that's something that she doesn't understand why it's been placed on her heart to do this, other than the fact that she had a grandmother who has recently passed. And she always loved tea and loved sharing a cup of tea with someone. So that whole theme gets extended through, and you just get to see this beautiful opportunity for something so small to grow and spark conversations in a number of people's lives.
I got to be honest, like, I'm intrigued right now. I want to read it and see what's going on with Thea. I don't know. Like, what a gesture, right? To buy a cup of tea for someone.
Yeah, well,
I mean, she's young, right? I mean, what's her age in the book?
She's 16.
Yeah, I mean, what 16-year-old just goes around randomly and buying cups of tea for people?
I know, right?
There's not many I know of.
No, but you know what, though? There's little things that people do in different ways that we wouldn't even necessarily recognize. Like, I know a lot of teens, one who randomly sends text messages to people, just letting them know that she's praying for them. And what an encouragement. Like, she sends it at the most amazing timing. And that is so small in how much effort it takes, doesn't cost her anything, but has a huge impact for people. And there's somebody else who likes to make YouTube videos. And he does it just because it's his passion, and he highlights friends' artwork and their music through these YouTube videos. And meanwhile, he's giving a platform to people who would probably never have been brave enough to do it on their own. So yeah, I think there's lots of ways that people have these giftings, these small parts of themselves that they may every once in a while let others see. But if we encourage not only teens, but everybody to find something that, gives them joy for whatever reason, and then to, again, spread it out into the world, what an amazing impact we could have, right? And again, for Thea, this is something that affects her own mental health through these experiences. And it's not just something she's doing because, hey, I'm supposed to do something nice today, so I'm going to buy someone a cup of tea. But it's just a habit that she's cultivated. And through that habit, she ends up growing herself. And there's, again, another aspect to the story. I won't go into too much detail, but she starts to recognize those people who are needing of that a little bit more than others through a sort of magical realism element that, again, I won't go into too much detail because it's exciting to find out while you're reading.
I'm one of those that reads the end and then goes back. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. I do not do that. I do not do that. My wife and I are really big. Okay. Yeah, my wife and I are really big Audible fans. Like, we read audio or listen to audiobooks a lot. And so this is terrible. I don't know why I'm telling you this story, but maybe because it's an author, so it's relevant. So hang with me, maybe. But I really love this author, Greg Horowitz. He writes this Orphan X series, it's an adult book series, but it's this amazing series, and I cannot get enough of this book. And I literally like powered through it in one day because I was just like, I gotta know what happens. I gotta know what happens. And so to me, that's a sign of a great author. So anyway, sounds like you're right in that category, perhaps. I don't know. We'll just put that out there. So you talk about writing and you talk about, this book, how it really helped you kind of get through your depression and your kind of stuff that you were dealing with. But I'm curious, how has writing really changed your life? Is this part of that change in your life?
Yeah, for sure. It's been a gradual change because I don't think anyone picks up something new and then just fully immerses themselves right away. I think well, maybe some people do, but for myself, I dabbled in it. When my kids were really young, I was back at work and it was the evenings. So I would take a half an hour to an hour in the evening and just write some words down, as I recognized that this was something I loved and that I had a bit of a passion that was extending into actually being practical and that people liked reading it. I took more time. Right now, that time is limited because of everything that's happening in the world. But we still carve out time for it in my life because I think my husband recognizes how healing it is for me. I've had other passions in the past. I used to love acting, like community theater, but that was a real time consumer. And I used to love training for triathlons, which was also really fun, but a huge time consumer. But both of those things were more for myself. And I found that as much as I loved them, it wasn't really giving back to anyone. And so when I came to writing and recognized that this is something that I love, but I can also give a piece of myself to others and do something productive with it, it clicked. And ever since then, it's just grown and grown inside of me as being something that I need as part of my daily activities. When you don't have a chance to write, it's, I guess, maybe similar to someone who doesn't get their cup of coffee in the day. I don't drink coffee, so I'm not a big caffeine drinker, so I don't really know what that's like, but I would imagine that it's a sort of a similar state of.
I would imagine so too. I love coffee, but I also love tea. But yeah, so yeah, I can relate with that. But yeah, I mean, running used to be that way for me. If I couldn't go out and run, I mean, my day was just wrecked. So I can relate with that for sure.
Yeah. So I think that's where it's at now, is that, I have this urge to get the thoughts in my head onto the page or the computer screen, as it may be. And if I go for a period of time where I don't have a chance to do that, there is an itch. And it's a desire that gets stronger and stronger until I really have a chance to sort of pour out the ideas and the thoughts. So yeah, it's definitely changed my life in that way. As far as, like my work-life balance and everything else, it's just replaced some of the other things that I would have done. So I watch next to no television now, which is probably, I don't know, it's probably a good thing, I guess. But I also do, a lot of my other sort of hobbies and things are related to writing now because I love it. So, instead of watching television, I'm reading books or listening to books. If I'm going to go for a run, which I still will, I'm listening to a podcast that might be related to writing or about a part of my audiobook. When I'm talking to my kids and working with them, I'm always drawn back to something they say. And I'm like, oh, that would be so great to add in within a character. And I will say this, not all writers and authors will take from their own lives. So I know that's something that some people are afraid of when they are close to an author or writer, that their lives will end up on the page. Whenever I decide to use something, I always ask the person and say, hey, can I use that phrase that you had, or can I use that analogy you were mentioning and just change it up a bit? And usually people are really excited about it. But it also changes the way you observe the world. So if I'm going to go out for a walk, so much more observant to the breeze passing through my fingertips. I'm aware of the colors that are surrounding me. Even when I'm sitting at like in my basement right now, because I'm trying to find a moment of quiet, I'm recognizing the piles and what's in those piles and why that pile has accumulated and what that reflects on my life, and what kind of piles would be on my characters' tables. And what does that mean for them? So I think it really does change how you see the world and how you process what's happening around you. In a good way, though. Again, I think I've become a lot more observant of human life and how people interact with each other as well, which I think is a quality that as a society we are losing. I think we're sometimes struggling to know how to relate to one another as we become more screen focused. And so spending that little bit of extra time looking at human interactions and spending time in those conversations and really trying to understand how each person would feel or respond internally within that is another aspect to writing that you really try and hone. You really try and increase your sort of awareness of.
I love all that. 100% love all that. Like I'm picturing piles. I'm picturing, you walking in Canada. I'm picturing like breezes and leaves and snow and okay, maybe not Eskimos because, that's like Winnipeg.
There's no Eskimos, but we definitely had snow yesterday, which was uncharacteristic for April.
That's crazy. Yeah, keep that snow. We will not take it here in Oregon. But you mentioned young people and you mentioned screen time and you mentioned, your kids too, right? Because I would imagine it's a struggle, right? How hard is it to really get young people into books today? Physical books, not like virtual books, not like, you're looking at it on a tablet like a Kindle. No disrespect to Kindle. Please don't pull a sponsorship that we don't have yet. But I'm curious, like, how hard is it to get a physical book in a young person's hand?
Yeah, I really think that you need to know books well to work with kids and understand what will really grab their attention. In our home, I'm really a little bit over the top strict with screens because I do want to ingrain in them the power of stories and how they don't need a visual attached to that story to become part of that world. And imagination is so important, not just from a creative standpoint, but just from being able to problem solve and, predict what will happen next and imagine how characters will interact in the future based on what you've just heard. And I think stories are so essential to us as humans in general for being able to picture ourselves within our larger narrative, with being able to say, I've got my own story and I can see it within what they're experiencing right now. But yeah, so for my kids, I really make a point of choosing amazing books. We read. I'm not a homeschooler by nature. I'm just doing it because of the COVID situation right now. But I have a lot of friends who really focus on the classics within their homeschooling programs. I can see why that would be so important. But I also choose books that my kids are gravitating towards as well, and find ways of integrating in stories that are similar to those. So for instance, my one daughter is loving the Land of Stories books right now. And so using that sort of fantastical world of storytelling and fairy tales that is used in those, I'm trying to introduce them to Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time, because you're getting some of that crossover in the fantasy element with these children traveling to another world. And they're loving it. Some of the language is a bit hard for them, but but they're loving it. Even my 5-year-old, which I find incredible. But yeah, and I think for parents, if parents are listening, again, my day job is I'm a speech language pathologist. So literacy is a huge part of what I do every day. And the amazing value out of reading goes way beyond just being able to function in society. Like the vocabulary you gain from books is so much more lush and broad than any conversation they will ever have, and even much more so than what they would hear on their television show that they like or their Netflix series. So I really stress for parents that kids need to be reading. And if they're not reading yet, then you read to them. We do a lot of read alouds every night. Even my 8-year-old who can read a novel, I'll still read to her because she loves it. And I love reading aloud. That's just a part of our family tradition. And I think if you establish those routines when they're young, they will continue to come to you for that. They will see it as just like sharing a meal as a family at dinner time, sharing a book at bedtime becomes something that they crave and that they long to just have those moments when they can cuddle up. We have reading nooks in both of their rooms, and they just love cuddling up in there, or forts. We've got a lot of forts these days as well. So yeah, you just set up the environment. You give them fantastic authors, and I think that they'll do the rest.
I hated reading growing up. So I'm hearing all this and I'm like, man, I might have missed it. I might have missed my window. For me to sit down and read a book, it is challenging. It's just, I think it's my personality. So I'm using your therapist ability. I know you're not that type of therapist, but you could be my reading therapist today. I just struggle with sitting down and like physically like just reading. It's just, it sounds painful.
Yeah.
But that's me.
The same way.
But that's me. But I can listen to a book all day long. And I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why.
Which is okay. I think for some people, they're better listeners. And again, that's why my kids they enjoy me reading to them, because there's a part of the act of reading that is tiring. Like if you're not a really great decoder and it takes you a little bit more energy to actually get through the pages, then it's not as enjoyable as having somebody read to you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as well. I think that you can still gain so much from audiobooks and read alouds. Obviously, we still want to encourage literacy from an individual standpoint as well. But yeah, no, my husband growing up, he shared that he was, again, not an avid reader. And even when we first got married, it wasn't something he would go to. But ironically now, I just introduced him to Goodreads within the last few months. But he was like amazed. He's like, what? They're going to like make recommendations for books based on the ones I've read? And oh, wow, this one looks really good. And so now that he's sort of found his niche, or niche, I think you say in the States.
I've heard it both ways. It's like tomato, so you're good either
exactly.
way.
Yeah. But yeah, now that he's sort of found his sweet spot for books, he's got a mile high of books on his nightstand. And he's usually reading, if not later than me, at different points in the day as well. So I do think it's something that you can still grow, and that you're not too late. You can definitely still find sort of
good to
opportunities.
Know. Good to know.
You're not lost.
It's good to know I'm not too late. So I heard it said actually on your website, which by the way, fascinating. So go check that out. We of course will link that in our show notes, Tara's website. So you want to go check that out. But my thing is when I'm digging into a guest and really finding out who they are, there are things that just jump out at me. And this is one of those things that jump out at me. Stories are what make us and change us. Where on earth did you hear that? And why is that so important?
Oh, I wish I'd had that question in advance because I could get you the exact quote.
That's why we don't give them ahead of time. No, I'm just kidding.
I know.
Do what you can. Do what you can. I mean, I just was curious because it was so profound to me. It was so profound. So whoever you got it from, awesome. But I mean, you made it your own. So there we are.
Yeah, for sure. I made it my own. It definitely was probably taken from a few different places. Again, when you read a lot of really inspirational books, because I read both fiction and nonfiction and compilation books. Robert Fulghum is a philosopher sort of author that I've read off and on throughout the years. And he has one book called Words I Wish I Wrote. And within that, there's a bunch of really inspirational words from people from across various professions. That was one spot that's really inspired the power of words for me overall. I've also read again from, the name is escaping me, but someone who said that it's the relationships and the books that you read that will change who you are 5 years from now. Those are the two main things. So, the types of relationships you have and the books that you have taken the time to make a part of your daily activities that will impact who and what you become. So I just took that, and I love that idea that if I invest in a few books that I really think are going to have an impact on my life, and then I make time for real people, like face-to-face interactions, then I'm going to be a different person. I'm not going to just stay stagnant. And I don't want to stay the same. I want to be someone who is always growing in my faith, growing in my relationships, growing in how I'm able to contribute to the world, growing in kindness, growing in gratitude. And I think that those are all really healthy life patterns for everybody, just to be able to know that your life has a purpose, whether you're a Christian or not. You want to be part of that larger story. And if you take your entire day every day and just do the same thing, if you never learn anything, if you never interact with people, your purpose in the world just kind of stops. You just kind of become like, oh, well, nobody really noticed, and I really didn't do that much today. And for me, I need to have a reason. I need to have a motivation to want to go to work, to be a better mom, to be a better wife, to help people through whatever I choose to do. And that brings me joy. That brings me so much purpose. And I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to look back however many years I get from now and say, I kind of wish I'd done something. Doesn't matter what, because for me, God's going to figure that out. But I kind of wish I put in some effort. And so for me, reading is part of my effort. It's part of what I choose to do in my life, because I know a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me, who have lived a lot longer, have a lot more wisdom, have a lot to share. And I can't meet those people face to face. Some of them have already died, and others are just way too famous. But I can read their words, and it's not that expensive to learn from them that way. And I know a lot of people will say, well, I can't go to expensive conferences or, attend training programs. Well, books are really cheap. Overall, like $20. You can gain so much from a few hours and $20. So yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of cup of tea and a lot of cup of coffee. $20, but it's worth it. I know what you're saying to me, and to me, when I read that, I was like, here's a lady that really wants to make a ripple effect, wants to make an impact in a very positive way. Because in my mind, stories are all we have left.
Yeah.
That's all we have left. And for me, I grew up in a family that doesn't have a lot of oral family tradition. Grandparents passing down, well, back when we were blah, 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 I don't have that. And so I love stories, and I love hearing people's stories, because I kind of want to engross myself or immerse myself in their story, because I think, to me, that's where I learn, And that's where what I get the most out of stories. And that's why I love doing podcasts, is because this idea that we get to talk, that we've never interacted ever until this moment verbally. And it's to me, it's just powerful. And I know you mentioned a while back that writing has been kind of your verbal outlet. Is that still true?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely have a chance to, sometimes they say it's really great to have a therapist because they just listen. Well, when you write, it's kind of like having a therapist. Nobody needs to respond to it. You can choose to share those words if you want to, but it's this outlet where you are able to share whatever's on your mind, share it with the world, and people may choose to respond, but they have to read through those words and listen before they have that chance to do that. So yeah, for sure. Like, I love talking too. I have a podcast as well. So
well, I was going to mention that. Yeah. I mean, if you want to check out our podcast, that was my segue, actually. That was my segue question to your podcast. So tell us about your podcast. I have 2 more questions and then I want to play a game with you. So
yeah, for sure. So I co-host the Hope Prose podcast with Rebecca Black, and it's a YA Christian books podcast. So we really tried to find, again, that niche of Christian novelists who are writing messages to teens that really inspire hope. And so we do bi-weekly author-based interviews for the most part. And I have this glorious opportunity to read parts of their stories on the podcast. And that's probably one of my favorite things because I love, again, reading aloud. So to pretend I'm an audiobook narrator for 5-10 minutes is wonderful.
if I ever write a book, I'll reach out.
Excellent. Sounds good.
Because I've heard other, writers, they read their own stuff. And I'm like, man, I would like ad lib it. I'm like, I know that's what the page says, but let me just add this in. This is better if I just add it in. So that's awesome. So we, of course, will link that in our show notes as well if you guys want to go check that out, which I do. I recommend that. I listened to a couple episodes and I was like, the girls know what they're doing. They got good stuff there. So that's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
So going back to the website, again, I just found this profound. It's not every day that you read, hey, here's 5 verbs to live by. What's going on there? What are the 5 verbs? I have them written down. You'll have to take my word for it. But what are your 5 verbs that you describe yourself as?
Oh, man. I'd have to look because I wrote that probably about a year ago.
So I'll help you then. Discovery, believe, inspire, cherish, and squishy.
Squish, yeah. Everybody needs to squish something. Yeah, I think, actions are so important. And it probably goes into that whole idea of moving forward and, having action within your own life and movement within your life. And these are things that, for me, are really important. I always want to be curious. I always want to find ways to inspire others. I know that one of my sort of spiritual gifts, according to those many online surveys, is encouragement. So I want to use that practically. And, I squish some people along the way when I do that, apparently. But yeah, I just think that if people could define their life based on their actions, their verbs, their movements, they would have a purpose. They would have this sort of sense of, I'm going to do something today. These are the things I'm going to do. And it could be anything. Like, you might just be someone who's really chill, and you can show that.
I don't think that's ever been described as my verb. No, I don't think so ever.
But you never know. Yeah. So I like that idea. I like the idea of, verbalizing who you are and allowing others to see that in action.
Yeah, I thought that was just funny and kind of like made me puzzle, like, what would be my 5 verbs? And I'm thinking to myself, why don't I know my 5 verbs? How does she know hers? Where did she get them? And all of that.
Oh, it was all on my own. It's not like an online survey or anything like that.
Oh, see, I thought there was. I thought there was like an Enneagram test or like a 5 verb survey or something. No? Okay.
No, it was just based on sort of, I went through and looked at my life and I looked at how people respond to me and what they sort of have said to me. And, through friends and my family, those are some of the things that they said stood out. It might be my kids who said I like to squish them a lot.
I'm still enamored with your accent. So there it is. I'm just going to put it out there for everyone. I love it.
I love
That's
it.
why I wanted to
Good.
read my book if I ever have one, because the word about to me always makes me giggle when I hear Canadians say about. So anyway, sorry.
Good.
Just getting a
No
little giggle
worries.
over here. So last question, then we're going to play a game together. How do you want to be remembered? And what do you want to be remembered for? 2-part question.
Oh, I want to be remembered as someone who lived out their faith in a really practical way, who loved others no matter who they were and what they did. I think I'm someone who forgives really easily. So I think I want that to be something that stays with me throughout my life. And what was the second part?
And well, I forgot my second part. So how do you want to be remembered and why do you want to be remembered? I think it was the
and
why. The why.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the why kind of comes into that. I don't think I want to be remembered for fame or accomplishment or any of the worldly views of success. I think I want it to just be something that, if at my funeral people are able to say she was someone who was kind, she was someone who forgave, she was someone who strived to make a difference, even if that was just through small actions.
That's powerful. I am embarrassed to say this, but I went to therapy a while back, a number of years back, about 10 years ago now. And one of the things in therapy, the guy said, one, who's at your funeral, which I thought was weird. And then 2, why I want you to write your obituary, which I also thought was weird. But in that, it kind of woke me up to the realization that my life really does matter and it really is important to someone. And to me, that is what's so powerful about our stories and about, how we walk through this world. And so, with that said, I don't know. I just think it's powerful. And so, Tara, I just want to say thanks so much for giving us some moments today. So we're going to play our game. This is a game we like to call Senseless.
All right.
And I'm going to roll the die because you're not in Oregon. You're in Canada. You can hear the die in the cup. It's a North Carolina cup, by the way, not a Blue Jays cup. So you got a number 6, which is my favorite question. Seems like a lot of people have been getting number 6. And it's true. I could take a picture of it for verification purposes, but we won't. So here we go. Dinner with one person, dead or alive. 1, where are you going to dinner? And then 2, who are you going to dinner with?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a big one. Where am I going to dinner? See, I start there.
Is that more of the struggle or is the person more of the struggle?
The person's more of the struggle, but the where I can do that because there was a restaurant. My husband and I went to Thailand, and there was this restaurant that we went to. I can't remember the name of it. It was like a side alley place, but it was so amazing. And the memories
Thailand amazing food, maybe that's what it's called.
Yeah, the food was so good. We had like a vegetarian pad thai type dish with like a curry on the side. We shared. It was so good. So I want to go back there because that just is such a huge memory in my life. And who I'd want to go with. Oh man, I'm trying to think of not your token responses. I might want to go with my great grandmother. And this comes back to the story idea. My grandmother just passed away, and she often spoke about her mom and the impact that she had on her life. As just being someone who had just come to Canada from, it's debatable whether it was Scotland or England. She kind of goes back and forth between those. But just how she started her life out here in Canada and the struggles that she went through at that period of time in the world. And my grandma held to those stories up to her last few days. And even in a place of extreme dementia, when she was near the end, she was asking for her mom. She was asking for her mom. And I just think, wow, what a profound impact you must have had on her life, that even though you've been gone for probably over 40 years at that point, she was still wanting to talk to you. So yeah, I think I want to sit down with her and just figure out what in life made you so memorable that that's the last person you're going to ask for.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
Sarah, first off, just give us all the info real quick. Website, we of course will link that. We have it, but just for our listeners so they can hear it verbally too. And then how
so
can
you
people
can-
get the book at the end of the month?
Awesome. Yeah. So my website's TaraKRoss.com. Pretty easy. And all my links for social media and stuff like that are on there. I tend to spend most of my time on Instagram just because I like pretty pictures. And my book is Fade to White. It's out through Illuminate YA. It's a young adult contemporary novel with a bit of magical realism. And it's out May 30th. So I'm so excited. It's my debut novel, my book baby, and I can't wait to share it with the world.
Now, can people get that through your site or by major
Yeah.
book dealers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
It's going
things
to be
like that?
available online everywhere. Probably not many in-person places given the current situation we're in. But yeah, through Amazon, both Canada and the US, through your typical booksellers, and through the publisher's website as well. So right now it's, I believe, up on Amazon already, but hopefully when this comes out, it'll be up everywhere.
Awesome. Well, Tara, again, thank you so much for coming on. I just want to say, you guys, if there's ever been that one moment in your life that you're like, you know what, maybe it's time I step out and really search for who I am and really search inside me and say, you know what, maybe there's an author resting inside me that needs to come alive. Let this young lady be an example to you in that regard, because this is her first book. 4 years ago, she would never have even dreamed of saying, I'm going to be an author. I mean, maybe she did, but that's how it starts. It's a seed being planted. And guys, I just want to remind you of that. What seeds are being planted in you right now that you need to start growing, cultivating, and then harvesting? Because that's what's going to take. In this new normal that we're in, it's not going to be the same. And I just want to call that to your attention as we close out today. And I also want to remind you of this. Of course, remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. On behalf of Garrett and myself, I want to say thank you so much for listening. And of course, stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes. Thank you so much for joining us in Other People's Shoes. As you know, I'm your host, Neil Matthews. I want to thank our guest, Tara, one more time. Just amazing opportunity to sit with her, and we're pleased that we got a chance to talk to her about her new book. Go check it out if you have a middle schooler. Fade to White, available in all bookstores now. And we will, of course, link that in our show notes. Speaking of checking things out, we, of course, would like to invite you back here next Wednesday when I get the privilege of sitting down with one of my really good friends. Here's a little sneak peek of next week's episode.
But my dad was never there. I never knew what his number was. And the person that I believe was him, I remember at 17, 18, before I went on my venture, calling and saying, hey, I'm your kid, blah, blah, blah. And I remember this lady, which was his mother, said, well, he doesn't have any money. And I was crushed. Did I ask you for money? I'm asking to see if this man is my father and if he wants to just tell me who I am. Because I think that's the biggest. If you want to know the ultimate search, who am I?
That's right. We're going to be sitting down with a gentleman that I have for years now found very fascinating. And you're going to hear about that in the episode. So stay tuned for that. Speaking of staying tuned into things, by the way, opspodcast.com is a great place to come back each and every week. Every Wednesday specifically, where past, present, and future episodes, of course, are, remember, opspodcast.com. And just want to call your attention to the fact, too, if you'd like to partner with us financially, we, of course, would love that, enjoy that, and just celebrate that. We, of course, have linked our PayPal information down below, so if you're interested in doing that, please feel free to do so. We are a tax-deductible nonprofit business, so, of course, we, of course, would love for you to do that. Speaking of love for you to do things, we are on the search. If you haven't been able to figure that out just yet in the last couple of weeks, we are in the search mode for the next guest. So maybe that's you. Maybe that's a friend. Maybe that's a family member. Maybe that's a coworker. Who knows? But if you're interested in being a guest, we of course would love to get information in your hands about that. You can call or text us at this number, 203-548-7463. That's 203-548-7463 if you're interested in doing so. So come be a part of that if you'd like to. Speaking of being a part of things, we of course are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter when we do post daily. So we would love to, of course, interact with you there. You can find us under OPS Podcast Show. So come be a part of that if you're interested as well. And of course, remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. We, of course, would love to invite you back next week. And on behalf of Garrett and myself, we hope you have a great week. Join us then when we walk in other people's shoes.